He ruled the underworld with blood on his hands, until the woman he betrayed walked in with two babies, who looked exactly like him. Now the devil himself is forced to face the one thing he can't control. But when his past comes knocking with a gun in the dark, will redemption save him? Or destroy everything he just learned to live for? The music inside the grand cathedral was soft, a gentle hum beneath the murmur of power and perfume. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above rows of tuxedos and designer gowns, yet the true center of gravity was the man striding through the marble aisle, Steve Smith, the name that whispered through the city like a secret people feared to say too loudly. Every step he took carried the weight of empires built on silence, deals, and blood. His smile was lethal, not because it promised kindness, but because it promised control. He wasn't just a guest at the wedding, he was the storm everyone pretended not to notice. Women turned their heads as he passed, drawn to the magnetic arrogance in his eyes, the kind that said, "I own everything I see." Men offered respectful nods, hiding the tremor in their hands, as if one wrong glance could seal their fate. Steve adjusted his black cufflinks, the diamonds catching the light, and let out a low chuckle. Tonight wasn't about business, he told himself. Tonight he would be normal, just a man celebrating love in someone else's story. He took a seat near the altar, folding his hands over the smooth wood of the pew. The groom was one of his oldest allies, a man who owed him his life. The bride was nervous, radiant, unaware of how many of the smiling faces in the audience carried weapons under silk jackets. Steve raised his glass when they exchanged vows. The reflection of candlelight danced in the golden liquid, and for a fleeting moment, he imagined a world where love could be simple, unbought, unbroken, untainted by power. But simplicity was a language he'd forgotten how to speak. The laughter swelled as the ceremony shifted into celebration. Champagne bottles popped. The pianist began a bright tune that filled the air with careless joy. Steve leaned back, his grin sharp and effortless, his voice smooth as velvet as he greeted those who dared approach him. Every word he spoke was calculated, every glance a reminder that even in a sacred place, he was the most dangerous man alive. He had spent years mastering the art of control, over people, over business, over himself. Nothing surprised him anymore. Nothing could touch him. Then the church doors creaked. It was a soft sound, insignificant in any other moment. But to Steve, it sliced through the music like a blade. The chatter dimmed, heads turned. The scent of rain drifted in from the street, cool and faintly sweet, and with it came a silence that wrapped the room in invisible tension. Steve's gaze followed the sound, curiosity flickering in his eyes. And then he saw her. A woman stood framed in the doorway, bathed in light that spilled from behind her like a halo of ruin. She wore a pale dress that seemed to hold both grace and defiance, as if it had been sewn from heartbreak itself. Her hair clung to her cheeks, wet from the rain, but her eyes, those eyes, carried a fire that made the air tremble. In her arms, wrapped in soft white blankets, were two newborn boys. For a heartbeat, Steve thought his mind was playing tricks. His smile faltered, confusion tugging at the corners of his mouth. The room, once alive with laughter, froze mid-breath. He stood slowly, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar rhythm. The glass in his hand wobbled, catching the chandelier's light one last time before slipping through his fingers and shattering on the marble floor. The sound was deafening. Every eye turned from the bride and groom to the door, to the woman who now took a single, steady step forward. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of calm and storm. The twins stirred, their tiny faces hidden for a moment, before one of them opened his eyes. Blue, piercing, icy blue, Steve's blue, a mirror he wasn't ready to face. The air left his lungs. Memories he had buried under layers of sin and steel clawed their way back. Laughter, heat, the whisper of a woman's voice promising forever. He blinked, trying to breathe, but the weight of recognition pressed against his chest like a gun muzzle. His men shifted uneasily, hands hovering near their jackets, waiting for a signal that never came. The bride whispered to her husband, "Who is she?" But her words barely reached Steve's ears. He couldn't look away. Each step the woman took echoed like a countdown to something inevitable. His pulse thundered in his temples, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. The world that once bowed to him now felt like it was tilting off its axis. She walked deeper into the hall, her dress trailing softly over the marble, her grip on the twins steady and sure. Steve saw the flicker of a tear glint under her lashes, and it nearly destroyed him. He knew that face. He knew it too well. Yet disbelief wrapped around him like chains. He told himself it couldn't be her, not here, not now, not with them. The music had stopped entirely. The priest, still frozen near the altar, made the sign of the cross under his breath as if sensing the devil himself had just been cornered by fate. Steve's lips parted, but no words came. His tongue felt heavy, his throat dry. Every instinct told him to move, to speak, to hide the tremor in his hands. But the sight before him rooted him in place. The woman stopped midway down the aisle. The light behind her dimmed as the doors closed slowly, sealing the room in a breathless quiet. For a second, she said nothing, just stared at him with eyes that carried years of pain and secrets. The babies shifted again, one letting out a small cry that pierced the silence like truth itself. Steve swallowed hard. The sound of that tiny voice sliced deeper than any bullet ever could. His vision blurred at the edges. The air seemed to hum with tension. And then, as if pulled by something stronger than pride or fear, he took a hesitant step forward. His voice broke the silence, rough and unsteady. "That's," he whispered, staring at the two little faces that mirrored his own. "Impossible." A tremor ran through his body. The crowd, still silent, watched the untouchable Mafia boss crumble in the most human way imaginable. His jaw clenched, his breath shallow. He tried to convince himself it was coincidence, that there were millions of blue eyes in the world, but the thought died before it could form. No, he knew. Deep inside, where no lie could reach, he knew. The woman tilted her head slightly, the faintest flicker of sadness crossing her features. The twins blinked up at him again, innocent, unaware of the storm they had just unleashed. Steve's heart hammered against his ribs, the echo of their cry looping through his mind. Somewhere, distant laughter from the street outside filtered in, normal life continuing, oblivious to the chaos about to explode inside this church. He felt every stare pressing down on him, the bride's fear, the guests' curiosity, his men's confusion. His entire empire had been built on never losing control, and now, with a single glance, it was unraveling. His chest tightened, his breath hitched. The world seemed to sway, colors dulling into gray. He pressed a hand to his temple, trying to steady himself, but the edges of his vision began to fade. His thoughts spun wildly. Who brought her here? Why now? Who knows? The timing felt deliberate, cruel, fated. He wanted to demand answers, but his body refused to obey. The twins' eyes, those perfect, familiar eyes, blurred before him. He stumbled a step forward, reaching out instinctively, and then stopped, afraid that touching them would make the truth undeniable. A cold sweat ran down his neck. The room tilted again, and for a split second, he felt the ground slip away from under him. His pride screamed for composure, but his heart whispered surrender. The devil himself was falling, and no one dared to catch him. Steve blinked hard, his last clear image the woman's gaze, fierce, unreadable, almost pitying. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. The twins' soft breathing filled the silence. The echo of shattered glass seemed to stretch forever, carrying the weight of everything he had ever buried. And in that single, impossible moment, the man who ruled the city realized he was not invincible. The smile that had once terrified the world vanished completely, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. His knees trembled. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he heard the faint whisper of a memory, laughter in the dark, a promise broken, a name he hadn't dared say in years. The edges of consciousness flickered. He tried to call out to her, to say her name, but the words caught in his throat. The church seemed to close in on him, the air heavy with questions no one dared to ask. The woman held her ground, the twins safe in her arms, her expression unreadable, almost tragic. And before the darkness swept him completely, Steve's lips formed the same words that would haunt him forever. That's impossible. The glass shards glittered on the floor like fallen stars, reflecting the stunned faces around him. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind that comes only before chaos. The great Steve Smith, the untouchable king of shadows, stood trembling under the weight of a truth too heavy to bear. And as he fell to his knees, his last thought burned through the haze. Who is she now? And why do those babies look exactly like me? The man who ruled the underworld just saw ghosts from his past walk through a holy door, carrying 2 pieces of his soul. The sound of shattered glass still echoed faintly in the cathedral, glinting under the fading light as Steve Smith, too. He man the world feared, the name whispered like a curse, knelt upon the marble floor. His breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. The laughter, the music, the gentle hum of celebration that had once filled the sacred hall had vanished entirely, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt alive. Every eye was locked on him, the untouchable king brought to his knees by a ghost from his past. His hand trembled as it brushed against the cold floor, and when he looked up, his world, the one built on iron control and ruthless ambition, had cracked wide open. Sarah stood before him like a haunting vision, every inch of her carved with the memory of what they once were and what he destroyed. The pale dress she wore clung to her with a quiet dignity that only deepened his shame. Her eyes, once filled with warmth, were now 2 blades, cutting through his defenses without mercy. She didn't speak at first, letting him feel the weight of her presence, the sharp edges of the truth he'd run from. The twins shifted softly in her arms, their small movements echoing louder in his heart than the gunfire of his darkest nights. One of them let out a faint cry, a fragile, human sound that made even the toughest of his men flinch. Steve's vision wavered. The sound ripped through him like a bullet. The echo of innocence in that cry, born from his sins, shattered the last piece of denial he clung to. He opened his mouth to speak, to reach out, to say her name, but the words dissolved in his throat. His body felt foreign, heavy, as though gravity itself had turned against him. The cathedral lights blurred, colors melting into one another. Somewhere deep inside him, the walls he'd built began to crumble, walls that once held back guilt, love, and every trace of the man he used to be. His hand reached towards Sarah, trembling, but she didn't move. Her expression didn't change. The same woman who once whispered that she'd wait for him forever now looked at him like a stranger. "You don't recognize them?" Her voice was low, steady, too calm, too sharp. It wasn't a question meant for an answer. It was an accusation, wrapped in a truth he could no longer deny. Her words lingered in the air like smoke. The guests shifted uneasily in their seats, murmurs rising like the rustle of leaves in a storm. "They look just like him," someone whispered. "Those eyes. God, they're his eyes." Another voice, trembling, followed. He's their father, isn't he?" The priest, frozen near the altar, stared at the twins with a trembling hand over his cross, as if blessing the innocence born from sin. Steve's knees buckled completely. He tried to steady himself, gripping the pew beside him, but his strength gave out. His body crashed against the marble with a dull thud that echoed like judgment. The sound silenced the whispers for a breath before the storm resumed. Gasps, murmurs, disbelief. The great Steve Smith, the man who had ordered death with a flick of his wrist, had collapsed before them all. His world, the empire of fear, loyalty, and power, was cracking in front of witnesses. Humiliation surged through him, burning hotter than pain. His pulse roared in his ears, and the edges of the room began to darken. He forced his eyes open, fighting the pull of unconsciousness, but all he could see was her, Sarah, standing tall, unshaken, holding his reflection in two tiny faces. The woman he'd once left in tears now stared down at him with an expression that mixed fury and sorrow in equal measure. Her lips curled into the faintest, bitter smile as she whispered, "You finally met your match, Steve." The words struck him harder than any bullet ever could. A match. The irony twisted in his chest. He'd faced enemies who wanted his empire, men who envied his power, women who desired his name, but none had ever brought him to his knees. Not until her, not until now. His throat constricted. The chandelier lights above him blurred into stars, spinning. The faint cries of his sons, echoed through the church, calling to him like ghosts demanding acknowledgement. His heart thudded painfully, each beat dragging him closer to something he wasn't ready to face. He wanted to speak her name again, to beg for an explanation, but his tongue felt like lead. The silence that followed Sarah's words was unbearable. Even his men, trained to stand fearless before death, looked away, unwilling to meet his eyes. The world outside the cathedral carried on, the hum of city life, the hiss of rain. But inside, time had stopped. Power had fallen, pride had shattered, and love, once buried under greed, had crawled back to haunt him. Sarah's grip tightened on the babies. She didn't move closer, didn't offer comfort, didn't show pity. There was something regal about her calm, something dangerous. Steve's mind spun with memories, her laughter in his arms, the softness of her touch, the promise she made under the same moon that watched them now. He remembered the night he walked away, convincing himself he was saving her by choosing power. He told himself she'd forget him. He told himself she was strong enough to rebuild without him. But standing there, seeing her eyes now, he realized she hadn't. It rebuilt. She had survived, alone, with his blood in her arms. His breaths came shorter, his chest rising and falling unevenly. "Sarah." The whisper left his lips before he could stop it. It wasn't the voice of a king. It was the voice of a man breaking. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned slightly, rocking one of the twins gently, as if shielding them from the chaos that surrounded them. That single gesture, the protective, motherly instinct, made Steve's heart twist in ways he didn't think possible. Every deal, every betrayal, every drop of blood he had spilled suddenly seemed meaningless. The weight of what he had lost hit him with full force, and for the first time, he didn't know if he could survive it. Somewhere behind him, one of his men moved forward, his voice low and cautious. "Boss, should we?" But he stopped when Steve lifted a trembling hand in warning. No one touched her. No one moved. This was not a moment for interference. This was reckoning. Sarah's gaze hardened. "I warned you once," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the silence. "Power doesn't make you untouchable, Steve. It just makes your fall louder." He flinched. The words dug deep, finding every scar he'd tried to hide. The murmurs rose again, spreading like wildfire. Some guests stood, others whispered prayers, while a few simply watched, fascinated by the downfall of a man who'd once seemed immortal. His vision darkened again, the edges of the room swimming in and out of focus. He tried to speak, but the words refused to come. All that left his mouth was a strangled gasp, followed by silence. The world tilted one final time before collapsing completely. He hit the floor hard, his body folding under the weight of his sins. Gasps filled the hall. Sarah stood motionless, her expression unreadable. One of the twins cried again, a sound so soft yet so powerful that it silenced every other noise. The echoes of the city outside faded. The cathedral seemed to breathe with him, slow, uneven, fading. The great Steve Smith, who had faced bullets, betrayal, and death wit, blinking, now lay unconscious at the feet of the only woman who ever truly mattered. And in that fragile stillness, Sarah whispered under her breath, her tone a mix of triumph and heartbreak, "You finally met your match." The chandeliers swayed slightly, their light trembling over the marble floor where power had fallen. The guests began to move, some toward the exit, others toward him, but no one dared to speak above a whisper. The air smelled of rain, blood, and regret. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, as if the heavens themselves were marking the fall of the devil who once thought himself untouchable. And as Sarah turned away, clutching the twins close to her chest, the echo of her heels on the marble floor became the sound of finality. Yet beneath it all, in that darkened space between truth and consequence, one question lingered like smoke. What would happen when the most feared man in the city opened his eyes again and remembered everything? The devil had fallen. But when he wakes, the city will tremble, because nothing is more dangerous than a man who has seen his own weakness. The scent of antiseptic and rain mingled in the air when Steve's eyes flickered open. The ceiling above him was stark white, humming faintly under fluorescent lights. The once mighty Mafia boss, the man who ruled the city's underworld with an iron hand, now lay on a hospital bed, stripped of his suit, his pride, his armor. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only proof that the devil still lived. His mind throbbed like a battlefield after war, fragmented memories bleeding into one another. The church, the twins, Sarah's voice. That voice, the only sound capable of breaking him, echoed through his skull like a haunting lullaby he didn't ask to remember. When consciousness returned fully, so did the ghosts. They came not as shadows, but as memories that burned, Hassan. Her laughter under the stars, her warmth pressed against his chest, the way she'd whispered his name like it meant something sacred. "You'll destroy yourself, Steve," she'd said once, standing barefoot in his penthouse after another night of chaos. He had laughed then, kissed her forehead, and told her destruction was the only thing he understood. But now, lying weak and stripped of everything, he realized she hadn't been warning him. She'd been predicting him. His fists clenched. The IV line tugged at his skin, and he ripped it free with a hiss. Blood beaded along his wrist, but he didn't care. Pain was familiar. It grounded him. What he couldn't bear was the silence. The last thing he remembered was her standing above him, her voice like venom coated in sorrow. "You finally met your match, Steve." And then, darkness. Now, he was surrounded by walls too white, too empty. He turned his head slowly. A bouquet of lilies sat on the bedside table, too pure, too ironic. There was no name card, just flowers. He sat up, ignoring the dizziness that clawed at his temples. His reflection in the window startled him. The same man who once commanded fear now looked haunted, older, hollowed by regret. He had been shot before, beaten, betrayed, but nothing compared to the wound she left by walking away again. Every breath felt heavy with the ghost of her presence. "You can't run from her," a whisper echoed inside his mind. It wasn't hers this time. It was his conscience, something he thought he'd buried years ago. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, planting his feet on the cold floor. His muscles protested, but determination burned through the exhaustion. Sarah was here, in this city, breathing the same air, carrying his blood in her arms. The thought ignited something primal within him. Fear, longing, fury, all tangled together. He needed to see her, to demand why she'd come back now, why she'd chosen a wedding to drop his sins in front of the world. He needed answers. Or maybe, deep down, he needed forgiveness. He stumbled to the door, his hand gripping the metal handle as the room spun. The world outside was dim, the corridor washed in the soft glow of midnight lights. The faint buzz of hospital machines echoed from distant rooms. Nurses whispered near the far end, their laughter gentle, unaware that a storm was about to walk past them. Steve's pulse quickened. He half expected to find her there. Sarah, waiting, holding their twins, her gaze unreadable as always. But when he stepped into the hallway, there was nothing. The corridor stretched long and empty. The scent of bleach lingered like a cruel reminder of sterility, of things that could never be undone. He called her name once, softly, almost hesitantly. "Sarah." The sound of his voice broke the silence, cracked and rough, more a plea than a command. No answer. He walked further, each step echoing against the tiled floor. The nurses glanced at him, startled by his presence, by the intensity in his eyes, but he ignored them. He checked the corners, the waiting room, the elevator. Nothing. No trace of her, no trace of the twins, just emptiness. Panic, unfamiliar and sharp, clawed at his chest. He'd faced assassins without flinching, stared down barrels of guns with a smirk. But this absence, it terrified him. His world had always been built on control, but Sarah had slipped through it like smoke. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard, feeling the weight of realization settle like lead in his chest. She had walked into his empire and dismantled it in one glance, and now she was gone again, taking with her the only proof that he could ever feel anything human. He turned back toward his room, something catching his eye. A folded piece of paper lay on the floor, half tucked under the door. His pulse skipped. He crouched slowly, fingers trembling as he picked it up. It was plain, creased at the edges, faintly damp from a drop of water, maybe from the rain still falling outside. He folded it, his vision blurring slightly from the effort. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her handwriting, elegant, controlled, sharp, where his had always been chaotic. The note read only one line: "Now you know what abandonment feels like." The words hit harder than any bullet. His throat tightened, his vision darkened again, but this time from fury, not weakness. He sank back against the wall, the paper crumpling in his fist. His heart pounded, each beat roaring with guilt and disbelief. The note was both punishment and confession. She hadn't disappeared into the night. She had left him this message deliberately, knowing it would destroy him more effectively than any revenge could. He could almost hear her voice saying it, calm, cold, final. "Now you know." He dragged his hand over his face, exhaling shakily. His entire life flashed through his mind in fragments. The night he chose another woman for power, the arguments, the way Sarah had cried quietly and said she didn't hate him, only pitied him. He remembered walking out, leaving her standing by the window as city lights flickered across her tears. He'd told himself she'd move on, that she'd forget, that he was doing her a favor by staying away. But that was the lie he told to live with himself. And now she had given him the truth. He looked at the note again, the words cutting deeper with each passing second. Abandonment. He had abandoned her once. Now she'd returned the favor. With precision, with intent, with justice. He tried to stand, but his legs wobbled beneath him. The note slipped from his hand, fluttering to the floor like a verdict. He wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. Sarah. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky, and rain began to drum against the hospital windows. It was as if the heavens themselves had decided to echo his turmoil. Lightning flashed, illuminating his reflection in the glass, eyes hollow, face pale, haunted. The devil didn't bleed from bullets, he bled from memory. He turned back toward the empty hallway, his jaw tightening. If she wanted him to feel what she had felt, she had succeeded. But she underestimated one thing. Steve Smith was not a man who accepted defeat. The ache in his chest shifted, twisting into something darker. Determination. Possession. If she thought she could vanish and leave him drowning in guilt, she didn't know the storm she'd awakened. He moved back to the window, pressing his palm against the cold glass, staring into the reflection of a city that once obeyed him. Somewhere out there, she was holding their sons. His sons. That truth burned behind his ribs like fire. "You can run, Sarah," he whispered, his breath fogging the glass. "But I will find you." The wind howled outside, rattling the window pane as if mocking him. In the reflection, lightning painted his face in streaks of silver and shadow. He looked like a man caught between two worlds, the sinner and the father, the king and the fallen. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, sharp and lonely. It was a fitting soundtrack for the moment his vengeance and remorse began to intertwine. The note lay on the floor, a small, crumpled piece of paper holding the weight of a decade of pain. He picked it up again, smoothing it gently, staring at the words until they blurred. He wanted to believe there was still something behind them, hope, maybe, or love, but all he saw was finality. Still, he folded it carefully, slipping it into his pocket like a promise he refused to forget. He turned toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The nurses whispered as he passed, recognizing his face but too afraid to speak. They saw a man who looked human for the first time. and that was more terrifying than his old self. As he reached the end of the corridor, he paused, his gaze falling on a reflection of himself in a glass door. The man who looked back wasn't the same. The power, the arrogance, it was all there, but buried beneath it was something new, something dangerous, a hunger not just for control, but for redemption, or perhaps revenge. He didn't know which yet. He pushed open the door and stepped into the storm. Rain drenched his suit instantly, washing away the faint scent of hospital and fear. He looked up at the night sky, water streaming down his face like tears he'd never admit to shedding. Somewhere in the darkness, Sarah was watching. He could feel it. And as thunder rolled once more, Steve Smith made a silent vow under the storm's roar that he would find her, no matter the cost. Whether to beg forgiveness or reclaim what was his, he didn't yet know. But one truth was clear as lightning illuminated the city. The past he buried had come back not to haunt him, but to demand a reckoning. Has Sarah come to destroy the man who broke her, or to save what little humanity he has left? The city was still drenched in the aftermath of the storm when Steve finally found her. Days had passed since that night at the hospital, days in which he hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't breathed without the echo of her name chasing him through every shadowed street. He'd searched everywhere, through hospitals, safe houses, orphanage records, whispers from his men who trembled each time he barked an order. And then, at last, he saw her. She was sitting beneath the awning of a small clinic on the edge of the city, the kind of place where hope and pain often shared the same walls. The morning light caught the faint shimmer of raindrops still clinging to her hair. She looked peaceful, almost sacred, holding one of the twins close to her chest as she fed him. The world seemed to slow around her, sound dissolving into silence. For the first time in years, Steve felt something unfamiliar crawl into his chest. Fear, not of bullets or betrayal, but of the woman who could undo him with a single glance. He stopped a few paces away, his breath caught between guilt and longing. Her profile was delicate yet fierce, strength carved into every line of her face. The glow of motherhood surrounded her like a soft shield, beautiful and untouchable. He had seen Sarah angry, seen her broken, seen her cry in silence when she thought he wasn't watching. But he had never seen her like this, complete, without him. The realization cut deeper than any wound. The second twin slept in a stroller beside her, tiny hands curled into fists that mirrored his own. Steve swallowed hard, his throat tightening around the words he wasn't sure he had the right to speak. Finally, his voice, raw and trembling, broke the silence. "Are they mine?" The sound made her freeze. Slowly she turned, her eyes locking onto his. The same fire that had once drawn him in now burned colder, steadier. For a heartbeat, she didn't speak. The wind carried the faint cries of a passing vendor, the rustle of leaves, the hum of traffic. But between them, there was only tension, heavy, sharp, alive. Then, with a voice as calm as ice, she said, "You left me bleeding, Steve. And now you want answers?" He flinched as if she had struck him. Memories surged like poison. The night he'd walked away, her hand reaching for him as he closed the door, her voice breaking behind him. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," he muttered, his words shaking. "I thought I was protecting you." The lie tasted bitter even now. She laughed, a low, disbelieving sound that held no warmth. "Protecting me? You destroyed me." Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let the tears fall. "You chose power over love. You chose sin over family. And now you think you can just show up and ask whose children these are?" His jaw tightened. He wanted to defend himself, but the weight of her truth pinned him down. He had chosen everything wrong. He had let greed speak louder than love. "Just tell me the truth," he said finally, voice breaking. "I need to hear it from you." Sarah stood slowly, adjusting the baby in her arms, her movements careful, deliberate. When she looked at him, her gaze wasn't just anger, it was heartbreak forged into steel. "Mark and Wood," she said softly, her voice trembling between pride and pain. They carry your blood, Steve, but they don't carry your name. The words hit him like a bullet. His chest ached, his heart stumbled. He took a step closer, his hand trembling as he reached out toward the child. Please, he whispered, let me hold him. Sarah stepped back instantly, her body instinctively shielding the twins from him. The look in her eyes was enough to break him completely. No, she said firmly. You don't get to touch what you abandoned. Steve's breath hitched, his hand falling back to his side. The air between them pulsed with anger, pain, and something unspoken that neither dared name. He studied her face, the defiance, the exhaustion, the quiet strength that made her seem carved from something divine. She wasn't the same woman he'd left. She was stronger now, built from ashes he had scattered himself. You think I don't regret it? He said, his voice barely more than a rasp. Every night, Sarah, every damn night I saw your face in my dreams. Her expression didn't soften. Regret doesn't heal what you destroyed. She turned slightly, her gaze falling to the twins. You can't undo what's been done. You can't buy your way back into their lives. Steve's fingers curled into fists. Then tell me what I can do. His voice cracked under the weight of desperation. Tell me how to fix it. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes glinting like stormlight. You can't fix it, she said quietly. You can only prove that you're not the monster you became. She took another step back, cradling the baby closer to her chest. If you want them, she whispered, her voice trembling with restrained fury, then prove you're human. The words hung in the air like a sentence passed. Steve's heart pounded. The city noise faded again until all he could hear was the twins' soft breathing and the distant beat of his own pulse. Prove he was human. How could he? Humanity was the one thing he had buried long ago to survive, yet stand. Before her now, he realized survival had cost him everything worth living for. He took a deep breath, eyes burning as he forced himself to meet her gaze. I don't know how to be that man anymore, he admitted, his voice hoarse. But I'll try. Sarah's expression flickered. Something almost like pain passed through her features before she masked it again. Trying doesn't erase blood, Steve. It doesn't erase what you've done. He stepped closer, his tone raw. Then let me start by earning their forgiveness. And yours. The vulnerability in his voice startled even him. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Forgiveness isn't something you earn, it's something you deserve, she said sharply. And you don't. She turned away, her shoulders stiff, her movements trembling only slightly as she rocked the baby in her arms. Steve stood in silence, watching her. The rain had started again, light at first, then heavier, painting the scene in silver and sorrow. The drops slid down his face, mingling with tears he refused to acknowledge. Sarah didn't move to leave, but she didn't invite him closer either. She stood her ground, her strength radiating like armor. He realized then that she didn't need him anymore, and that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. He knelt slowly, lowering himself to her level, as if the act could bridge the gulf between them. You don't have to trust me, he whispered, but let me be here, just for them. Sarah's lips parted slightly, hesitation flickering across her face, but then she shook her head. Being here isn't enough. You were always here in body, Steve, but never in soul. Her words tore through him, clean and deep. He wanted to reach for her, to beg, to explain, but explanations were meaningless now. The man she once loved had buried himself beneath years of crime, arrogance, and sin. The man standing before her was just a ghost trying to remember how to breathe. He looked down at the twins again, two small, perfect lives born from his greatest sin and her greatest strength. Sarah's voice softened, just slightly. They're innocent, Steve. Don't drag them into your world. She glanced at him, and for a fleeting moment he saw the woman who had once loved him. If you truly want to prove you've changed, start by walking away from the darkness. The wind caught her hair, and he was struck by the haunting familiarity of it, the same way it used to fall across her face when she laughed, the same way it framed her when she said goodbye. But this time, he couldn't let her walk away without a promise. I will, he said quietly. For them. For you. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for truth. Finally, she turned her gaze to the twins, then back to him. "Prove it," she said softly. "Not with words, with who you become." Steve's chest tightened as he nodded. The rain fell harder now, soaking through his clothes, but he didn't move. He watched as she gathered both twins, one against each shoulder, her strength radiant, her expression unreadable. She walked past him, her scent brushing against him like a memory. He didn't turn, couldn't. He just stood there as her footsteps faded into the distance, leaving him alone beneath the storm. He tilted his face toward the sky, closing his eyes, and letting the rain mix with the salt of his tears. For the first time in his life, the devil felt small, human, breakable. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the ruins of who he'd been, a flicker of something else stirred. A promise, a hunger to change. Sarah's voice echoed in his mind. "If you want them, prove you're human." And as thunder rolled above the clinic, Steve whispered to himself, "Then I'll learn to be human again." But in the distance, unseen by both of them, a black car idled at the curb, windows tinted, engine humming low. A shadow sat inside, watching the scene unfold with silent interest. The past. Steve thought he could escape hadn't vanished. It was waiting. Can the devil truly learn to feel again? Or will the darkness he built return to claim everything he's just begun to love? The rain hadn't stopped since that night outside the clinic. It poured endlessly, like the sky itself had chosen to mourn the man Steve Smith used to be. Days bled into nights, and nights into endless hours of silence that gnawed at him from the inside. The empire he had built, brick by bloody brick. His casinos, his docks, his loyal soldiers who trembled at his name, now stood on fragile ground. Every meeting blurred together. Every voice in the room echoed with the sound of her words. "If you want them, prove you're human." He had once been a god in the underworld. Now, he was a man haunted by the ghost of his own sins. His empire felt colder, emptier. His men could feel it too. They exchanged uncertain glances in his presence, whispering when they thought he couldn't hear. "The boss has changed," one said. "He's distracted. He's losing it," muttered another. They didn't dare say it aloud, but fear was turning into doubt. And in Steve's world, doubt was a disease that killed faster than bullets. He sat behind his mahogany desk in the high-rise office that overlooked the city, his empire glittering beneath the storm. But even from there, nothing gleamed the way it used to. The whiskey in his glass tasted like ash. The stacks of money piled around him looked meaningless. Power, women, control, the trinity that once fueled his soul, now only reminded him of everything he'd lost. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, the scar above his brow, the sharpness of his eyes, the ruthless aura, all still there. But the fire behind those eyes was dimming. He wasn't the devil anymore. He was a man trying to understand what it meant to live without destroying. "Boss," his right-hand man, Jace, said carefully, stepping into the office. "The shipments—" "I don't care about the shipments," Steve interrupted, his tone low, dangerous. Jace froze. The Steve he once knew never ignored business. "What's wrong, boss?" Steve looked up, his jaw tight. "Everything." When Jace left, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the city lights below. The rain traced paths down the glass like tears the city didn't want to admit. "You wanted to prove you're human," he thought bitterly. "Now look at you, bleeding inside, powerless." He couldn't focus on anything except the image of Sarah's face the day she told him the truth. The way her voice trembled when she said, "They carry your blood, but not your name." That sentence lived in his head like a curse. Hours later, when the night deepened and the world slept, Steve found himself driving without purpose. The streets were slick with rain, neon lights reflecting off the asphalt like shards of broken dreams. He didn't know where he was going until he stopped. His hands tightened around the steering wheel when he realized where he was, parked outside her apartment. He told himself he wouldn't go this far again. He told himself he'd respect her space, give her peace, but he couldn't help it. The part of him that once commanded armies was now helpless against one woman. Through the misty windshield, he saw the warm glow of light from her window, and there she was. Sarah moved around the small living room, her hair tied loosely, a soft robe around her frame. She looked different, calmer, gentler, radiant in a way he hadn't seen in years. Her smile came easily now, unburdened by pain. The twins, his sons, were on the floor, laughing as they tried to stack wooden blocks, their tiny giggles echoing through the glass and into his heart. Steve's hand trembled as he rested it against the steering wheel. His throat tightened. For a long time he just sat there, watching her move, her laughter like a melody he'd forgotten how to play. The sound, even muffled by rain, was enough to make his chest ache. He could see it clearly now. The life that could have been his if he hadn't chosen the throne of crime over the warmth of a family. He could almost imagine himself there, sitting beside her, watching those same twins call him Dad. The fantasy hurt more than the truth. He hit the steering wheel once, hard, his jaw clenching. The sound of the horn startled him back to reality. "Damn it," he hissed, his breath ragged. "What have I done?" His voice cracked in the darkness of the car. The weight of regret pressed down on him until he felt like he couldn't breathe. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the steering wheel, eyes burning. His empire, his wealth, his reputation, none of it mattered anymore. All he could see was the home he could never enter, the family he could never claim. But then, something shifted, movement behind her. Steve lifted his head instantly. His sharp gaze caught a faint shadow moving across the room. A tall figure passed behind Sarah, pausing near the twins. He froze, his breath caught. The silhouette of a man, broad shoulders, confident stride, stepped closer to her. Sarah turned slightly, smiling faintly as the man said something Steve couldn't hear. She nodded. The man reached out, brushing something from her hair. And Steve's world went red. His blood roared in his ears. His fingers tightened around the wheel until his knuckles turned white. Every instinct in him screamed to storm that apartment, to drag the man out, to demand answers. Who was he? Why was he there? Why was she smiling at him? That soft, tender smile that once belonged to him? He leaned forward, his breath fogging up the glass, eyes narrowing on the scene inside. The man picked up one of the twins, cradling him with ease, like he'd done it before. Sarah stood beside him, laughing quietly. Steve's pulse thundered. He could barely hear the rain anymore, only the sound of his own heartbeat, pounding like war drums. She moved on. The words slipped from his lips, sharp as knives. She replaced me. For a moment he felt the old rage, the kind that used to fuel his empire, the kind that made men kneel and cities tremble. But underneath that fury was something more dangerous: heartbreak. He forced himself to stay seated, gripping the steering wheel until his hands shook. He couldn't look away. Every second was agony. Every smile she shared with that stranger was another cut to his already shredded soul. He had left her. He knew that. He had no right to feel betrayed. But emotions didn't follow logic. Love never did. The sight of her standing beside another man, his sons calling someone else uncle, was unbearable. The rain intensified, blurring the window. Bows. It even through the distortion, Steve could see enough. The warmth, the light, the life inside that apartment that used to belong to him. He exhaled shakily, trying to control the storm inside him. He had changed, or at least he wanted to. Sarah had told him to prove he was human, but how could he, when jealousy clawed at his veins like fire? He started the car but didn't move. His mind warred with itself, the devil whispering revenge, the man whispering restraint. Finally, he turned off the engine and sat in the dark, letting the rain drown out his thoughts. He watched for a while longer. The man put one of the twins to bed, his movements gentle, practiced. Sarah leaned in the doorway, arms folded, smiling softly. Then the man turned, said something that made her laugh again. Steve's teeth clenched. That sound, her laughter, used to be his reward, his salvation. Now it belonged to someone else. He couldn't take it anymore. He opened the car door and stepped out into the rain. Cold water soaked through his coat, but he didn't care. He stood across the street, staring at the light spilling from her window, fury and sorrow twisting inside him. The night air was thick with thunder and unspoken truths. He wanted to march up those stairs, pound on her door, demand to know who that man was, but something stopped him. Her voice echoed in his mind again. If you want them, prove you're human. And so, he stayed still, silent, watching the woman he loved through the veil of rain, realizing that this quiet torment, was the price of the life he once chose. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating his face, the perfect mask of a man torn between redemption and ruin. Then, through the rain-streaked window, the man turned slightly, his face finally visible for an instant. Steve's eyes widened. He knew that face. It wasn't just some stranger. It was Leon Vargas, his most trusted lieutenant, the man who had built half his empire, and the one person he never thought would betray him. Steve's heart went cold. Who is Leon to Sarah, protector or something far more dangerous? And as the storm rages on, will Steve's jealousy awaken the devil he's been fighting to bury? The storm outside raged like a reflection of the one within him. The rain came down in violent sheets, drenching Steve Smith as he stood in front of the small apartment door that glowed with faint yellow light. His heart pounded against his ribs like a war drum, his breath visible in the cold night air. Every drop of rain seemed to whisper the same question again and again. Who is he? The image of Leon Vargas holding his son burned in his mind like fire. That smile on Sarah's lips, the soft, effortless warmth she once reserved for him, now belonged to someone else. His fingers trembled as they curled into a fist, and before he could think twice, he pounded on the door. When the door opened, Sarah stood there, barefoot, her hair loose, wrapped in a pale robe that glowed softly under the hallway light. Her expression was unreadable, calm but not welcoming, strong but shadowed with pain. The air between them crackled with everything unsaid. Steve's voice came low and rough, barely contained. Who is he? The words tore from his throat like a growl, each syllable dripping with jealousy and anguish. Sarah didn't blink, didn't retreat. Her voice was cool and steady when she answered. Leon Vargas, the doctor who delivered your sons, the one who stayed when you didn't. The sentence hit him harder than any bullet ever had. The one who stayed. He staggered back half a step, his face paling as her words carved into him. For a long, heavy second, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence, pounding against the pavement, filling the spaces where love used to live. The twins began crying inside, small, desperate wails that sliced through the air like broken glass. Sarah's eyes softened slightly as she turned her head toward the sound. Steve's chest tightened. That sound, that tiny cry, was his blood calling out to him. "Let me see them," he said, his voice trembling. It wasn't the command of a mafia boss anymore. It was a plea, raw and human. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with 1,000 memories. Love, betrayal, loss. The rainwater glistened on her lashes, making it hard to tell if she was crying. "Steve," she whispered, almost to herself, as if saying his name hurt. He took a step closer. "Please, just once, let me see them." Her silence stretched, heavy and painful. Then, with a slow exhale, she stepped aside. The door creaked open wider, and the soft warmth of the apartment spilled onto the rain-soaked threshold. Steve hesitated for a fraction of a second, afraid that the moment he entered, he would shatter the fragile peace she had built. But he stepped in. The air inside smelled faintly of baby powder and chamomile. The soft hum of a lullaby toy filled the space. And then he saw them. 2 tiny souls in matching blue onesies, lying on a small blanket in the living room. Mark and Wood, his sons. They were more beautiful than he could have imagined. Dark hair, porcelain skin, and those unmistakable eyes. His eyes, sharp blue, like the calm before a storm. His breath hitched as he crouched beside them. The babies looked up, their gazes curious, innocent, unafraid. One reached out, tiny fingers brushing against his hand. The touch broke him. Tears spilled freely down his face, mixing with the rain still dripping from his hair. He had faced death 100 times without flinching, but the sight of his son's small hand clutching his finger made his entire body tremble. "Hey," he whispered hoarsely, voice cracking. It's me." The baby gurgled softly, and Steve let out a broken laugh, the sound of a man who had forgotten what it meant to feel. Behind him, Sarah stood silently, arms folded. Her lips quivered as she watched the man who once destroyed her, now crumbling in front of their children. She wanted to hate him, to turn away, but the image of him kneeling on her floor, drenched in rain, eyes wet with regret, tugged at something deep within her. Steve looked up at her, eyes red. "I've done things I can't undo," he said, his voice raw. "But if there's one thing I can fix, it's this." He gestured toward the twins. "Let me be part of their lives. Let me be their father." Sarah shook her head slowly, her tone cutting through his plea like ice. "You think you can erase years of blood and betrayal with a few tears?" she said. "You left me when I needed you most. You chose power over love. You can't just walk back and claim what you abandoned." "I know," he whispered, "but I'm not that man anymore." Her laugh was soft but bitter. "You say that now. But the devil doesn't just disappear, Steve. He hides. He waits." His gaze hardened, though his voice remained gentle. "Then I'll bury him myself." Before she could respond, one of the twins began to cry again. Steve instinctively reached out, lifting the baby carefully into his arms. Sarah froze, watching, ready to stop him if she saw even a hint of danger. But what she saw instead stunned her. Steve held the child with a gentleness that didn't seem possible for a man like him. He rocked the baby softly, whispering words she couldn't hear. The crying stopped. Her heart twisted painfully. For a moment, the years melted away, and she saw him as he once was, before the violence, before the empire, before everything fell apart. Just Steve, the man who once made her feel safe. He looked up at her again, his voice breaking. "Sarah, I'll leave it all. The Mafia, the money, everything. I'll walk away from the underworld, for them, and for you." Her breath caught. The words hung in the air, trembling like a fragile promise. Lightning flashed outside, throwing his face into sharp relief, strong, wet, desperate. She could see it in his eyes, the sincerity, the pain, the war he was fighting within himself. For the first time, she saw a man who wasn't trying to control her or the world, just himself. But she also knew what walking away from that life meant. Men like Steve didn't just quit. The Mafia didn't allow exits, only endings. "You can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "They'll kill you." He smiled faintly, a ghost of his old arrogance. "Maybe, but I've already been dead without you." Her chest tightened. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said, eyes locked on hers. "You told me to prove I'm human. This is the only way I know how." For the first time, she didn't have an answer. The twins stirred again, their small sounds filling the silence between them. Sarah turned away slightly, wiping at her cheek, whether from tears or frustration, even she couldn't tell. Steve took a slow step forward, still holding the baby. "Let me try," he said softly. "Let me be the man I should have been." But before she could respond, a car screeched to a halt outside. Both their heads snapped toward the window. Headlights glared through the rain, cutting across the small apartment. Sarah's pulse quickened. Steve's jaw tightened. From the shadows beyond the glass, he saw movement, silhouettes stepping out of the car. 3 men wearing dark coats, faces hidden. Steve's instincts screamed danger. He knew that stance, that silence. His past was here, knocking on Sarah's door. He gently handed the baby back to her, his voice low, steady, lethal. "Take them inside. Lock the door." "Steve, what?" "Now," he ordered, the edge of the old Mafia boss flickering back in his tone. She obeyed instantly, heart pounding, clutching the twins close. Steve turned toward the door, every nerve in his body snapping into focus. The storm outside roared louder as if sensing the violence about to unfold. He didn't know if he was ready to fight again, or if he even wanted to. But he knew one thing for certain. Whatever waited beyond that door, he would face it not as the devil the world once feared, but as a father ready to protect what little light remained in his shattered life. Lightning cracked across the sky as he reached for the doorknob, rain hammering the windows like a countdown. Can a man buried in sin truly walk away from the underworld, or will the past he tried to escape break down the very door he's now sworn to protect? The night had long since quieted the echoes of gunfire that once haunted the Smith mansion. The grand estate that had once throbbed with the pulse of the underworld now sat in eerie stillness, wrapped in silence and ghosts. The rain had stopped, but the scent of the storm lingered. Wet earth, cold wind, and the faint metallic tang of memories that refused to fade. The iron gates creaked open slowly, and through the mist, Sarah stepped forward. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she walked the long, empty path toward the mansion's entrance. The last time she had stood here, this house had been alive with men, music, and sin. Now, it looked like a grave. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she stepped inside. The grand chandelier above flickered dimly, its crystals coated with dust. The portraits of men who ruled before Steve hung crooked on the walls, all of them smiling with the arrogance of power. But now their smiles seemed hollow. She took a deep breath and whispered under her breath, "What have you done, Steve?" And then she saw him. He sat in the middle of the vast room, the former throne of his empire, surrounded by stacks of papers, folders, and scattered documents. His tailored suit was replaced by a plain black shirt, sleeves rolled up, veins visible along his forearms. The glow of a single lamp illuminated the fatigue etched into his face. He looked older, not by years, but by battles fought within himself. When he lifted his eyes, she froze. There was no arrogance there, no fire of dominance, just exhaustion, sincerity, regret. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice low, hoarse from nights without sleep. She hesitated. "You look different." A faint smile touched his lips. "Tired, but real. Maybe because I finally am." He gestured to the piles of paper around him. "These," he said, "are my sins. The empire, the accounts, the blood money, the names. All of it. Gone." She stepped closer, scanning the chaos. Every sheet bore the stamp of his empire. Contracts, property deeds, offshore accounts, records of men who owed him loyalty. "You're dismantling it?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Piece by piece." His eyes darkened, but his tone remained steady. "I sold the docks, burned the ledgers, paid off the debts, every illegal business I built. It's over." Sarah stared at him, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "Why now? Why throw away everything you ever wanted?" "Because it cost me everything I ever loved." His gaze didn't waver. "You were right. The devil doesn't die, but he can starve. I'm starving him, one choice at a time." For a long moment she said nothing. Her throat tightened. She had waited years to hear words like that, but now that they were real, she didn't know how to believe them. "You can't just erase who you were, Steve," she whispered. "It doesn't work like that. You can't change overnight." He rose from his chair slowly, his movements deliberate, steady. "I know," he said softly, walking toward her. "But I can try. I can spend the rest of my life trying." She wanted to pull back, to remind herself that this man had once chosen blood over love. But his eyes, those once cold eyes, now held something she hadn't seen in years: humility. And that scared her more than his rage ever had. "Sarah," he said gently, his hand hovering near hers. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance to show you who I can be. For them. For you." Her gaze flicked to the corner of the room, where the twins sat on the flose, or playing with wooden blocks. Their laughter filled the hollow mansion, echoing like light piercing through the ruins. They looked up occasionally, giggling when Steve smiled faintly at them. The Warmth in that look melted a fraction of her defenses. "You know," she said quietly, "they don't understand who you are. To them, you're just a man who smiles when they laugh." He swallowed hard, nodding. "Then maybe that's who I should have been all along." The simplicity of his answer broke something in her. For years, she had built walls of steel around her heart, convincing herself he was beyond redemption. But standing here, watching him surrounded by the ashes of everything he once worshipped, she saw not the devil, but a man clawing his way out of hell. "You think this will be enough?" she asked, her tone trembling despite her efforts to sound strong. "To walk away from all of it? The men you betrayed, the deals you broke, they won't let you live." He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Maybe not. But at least I'll die clean." Her chest tightened. He meant it. Every word. The thought terrified her. "You don't get to throw your life away just because you're guilty," she said sharply, her composure cracking. "You don't get to die for redemption, Steve. You live for it." His lips parted, caught off guard by her sudden fire. For a moment, the tension between them felt alive again, the same magnetic energy that once drew them together, now tempered by years of pain. "I'm trying to live," he said finally, "but I can't do it without you." She shook her head. "Don't make me your redemption." "I'm not," he whispered, stepping closer until their faces were inches apart. "I'm making you my reason." Her breath hitched. The air between them thickened, heavy with memories of what they'd been, and what they could have been. The scent of rain still clung to his skin, and his nearness made her pulse race despite everything. "Steve," she murmured, her voice faltering. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling as his fingers brushed hers. "Stay tonight," he whispered, beard. "Not because I deserve it. Not because you owe me anything, just stay. See if I've changed." Her mind screamed no, but her heart, traitorous and fragile, hesitated. The twins giggled again in the background, the sound innocent and warm, grounding them both in a fragile peace. She turned slightly, watching them play, and something inside her softened. She had dreamed of this. Not the mansion or the wealth, but this moment, the possibility of a family that wasn't broken by power or fear. She looked back at him, searching his face for lies, but found none. Only truth, only longing, only love buried beneath guilt and ruin. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice a whisper. He nodded slowly. "Then don't promise forever. Just promise tonight." The room fell into silence again, the kind that carries the weight of everything unspoken. Her heart pounded. She wanted to walk away, to protect herself from another heartbreak. But when she saw the twins look up at him, their tiny faces lighting up with joy, something inside her broke completely. She took a slow breath, her hand still trembling in his. "Tonight," she said softly. Steve's eyes widened, disbelief flickering into hope. The faintest smile tugged at his lips, not the smile of a conqueror, but of a man who had finally found peace. Outside, the storm had finally died. The sky cleared, revealing a quiet moonlight that spilled through the cracked windows. It painted them both in silver, two broken souls standing in the ruins of their past, trying to rebuild something that might still be called love. But as the wind rustled through the empty halls, neither noticed the black car parked down the hill, its engine running. Inside, two men watched the mansion from the shadows, their eyes cold, their mission clear. Steve's decision to abandon the Mafia had not gone unnoticed. And somewhere in the dist, ants, the faint echo of an old enemy's voice whispered through the static of a radio, "If the devil wants to die human, let's see how human he bleeds." Will Sarah stay and believe the man who broke her heart, or will the ghosts of his past arrive before dawn to remind them both that redemption always demands blood? Dawn arrived like a whispered promise, soft, trembling, and fragile. The first rays of sunlight crept through the torn curtains of the old mansion, spilling across marble floors that had once echoed with the footsteps of killers and kings. But today, They only echoed with quiet breaths and the sound of peace. Sarah lay half awake, her head resting against Steve's chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, slow, human, real. The storm outside had passed, but its scent still lingered, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. He hadn't slept much. Even in rest, there was a weariness in him, a man who had carried too much for too long. When his eyes opened, they didn't burn with fire or dominance anymore. They softened when they landed on her. The world's most feared man, reduced, or perhaps reborn, into something so simple it was almost holy. "You stayed," he murmured, voice rough, fragile with disbelief. Sarah smiled faintly. "I said just for the night," she teased softly, but her hand lingered on his cheek, thumb tracing the faded scar that once defined him. "But maybe one night was enough to see the man you became." Steve's lips curved, not into the dangerous grin the city knew, but into something honest, shy, almost boyish. "I don't deserve that chance," he whispered. She looked at him, eyes glimmering in the golden light. "No one deserves redemption, Steve. They earn it." For a long moment they stayed in silence, wrapped in warmth neither had known in years. Then he took her hand, pressing it against his chest. His pulse thudded beneath her palm, fast, trembling. "You were my punishment," he said quietly, voice cracking, "and my salvation. You tore down everything I thought made me strong." Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears. "And you finally learned," she replied, "that love isn't weakness, it's power." He closed his eyes, breathing in the truth of her words. For years, he had ruled through fear, through the sharp edges of cruelty and control. But none of that had ever made him feel what he felt now, this terrifying, beautiful vulnerability. He had traded guns for gentleness, blood for laughter, and for the first time, it felt right. Months passed. The mansion, once a fortress of shadows, transformed. The scent of gun oil faded, replaced by fresh paint and the faint aroma of home-cooked meals. The walls that had heard screams now carried the echoes of giggles. The twins, Mark and Wood, had turned their father's world upside down. Tiny hands tugged at his sleeves as he tried to work. Chubby faces pressed against his chest when they needed comfort. Every time they laughed, Steve felt his heart stutter, a reminder that this was the life he had once thrown away, now gifted back to him through grace he didn't deserve. He no longer wore tailored suits or gold watches. Instead, he wore simple shirts, rolled sleeves, and the kind of peace that can only come after a lifetime of war. Sarah often caught him just watching them, the twins crawling on the rug, babbling nonsense, their joy pure and untamed. One evening, she found him sitting on the floor with them, building tiny towers of blocks. His laughter filled the room, deep, unguarded, almost boyish. She leaned against the doorframe, smiling softly, heart swelling. "You look happy," she said. He glanced up at her, eyes glowing. "I didn't know what that word meant until now." Sarah crossed the room and sat beside him, watching as the twins knocked the tower down again. He chuckled. "Guess they inherited my need for destruction," he joked. And she laughed, a sound that warmed the air. For a moment, the world felt perfect. Nights were gentler now. No more gunshots, no more whispered deals, just lullabies. The once mighty Mafia boss, Steve Smith, now spent his nights tucking his sons into bed, kissing their foreheads, whispering promises of safety. He intended to keep with his life, and each night, when the house fell quiet, he would step outside onto the balcony, breathing in the night air. Sometimes Sarah would join him, her head resting against his shoulder as they watched the stars. "I used to think peace was for the weak," he said once, voice distant. "Now I know, it's the bravest thing in the world." She smiled. "Then be brave, Steve. Stay this man." He kissed her forehead gently. "For you," he whispered, "I will." But fate, as always, was listening. That night the twins were restless, giggling, fighting sleep. Sarah sang softly to them, her voice tender, the same melody she used to hum during the nights Steve never came home. Now he stood beside her, rocking one twin gently while the other clutched his finger. Their small eyes blinked up at him, filled with innocence. When both finally drifted off, Sarah turned to him, smiling. "You're good at this," she whispered. He smirked faintly. "Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to ruin." They both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that came from peace, not pretense. He leaned in and kissed her hand again, that same hand he once let slip away. His lips trembled against her skin. "This," he said, voice raw, "is what I was meant for." She brushed a tear from his cheek. "Then hold on to it, no matter what." He nodded. "I will, I swear." Outside, the rain began again, soft, rhythmic, cleansing. The wind whispered through the trees. It should have been just another quiet night. But as Steve turned to close the window, a faint sound cut through the stillness. Click. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The sound of metal, deliberate and cold. His heart froze. Sarah's smile faded. "Steve?" He raised a hand, eyes narrowing. The instinct of the old devil flickered alive beneath his calm. He stepped closer to the window, the moonlight glinting across his face. And there, just beyond the glass, a shadow moved. Then came the unmistakable reflection of steel. A gun. He moved fast, yanking the curtain closed, shielding the room. His pulse thundered. The twins stirred in their crib, whimpering softly. Sarah gasped, clutching one to her chest. "No," she whispered. "Not again." Steve's mind raced. For months he had pretended the past was gone, but deep down, he'd always known shadows don't die. They wait. They follow. He turned to her, voice low but steady. "Get the boys. Go to the cellar. Now." Her hands trembled. "Steve, no." "Go!" he barked, but his eyes softened instantly after. "Please, I'll handle this." Sarah hesitated, tears filling her eyes. She looked at him, at the man who had burned the world once, and now was ready to burn himself to protect what little light remained. He kissed her forehead one last time. "If they want the devil," he whispered, "they'll find a man instead." As she ran with the twins, Steve turned toward the window, the old instincts returning like muscle memory, the calm, the calculation, the readiness for death. But this time, it wasn't power driving him. It was love. He reached beneath the drawer, pulling out a gun he had promised never to touch again. The weight of it felt foreign now. He exhaled, steadying himself, the sound of footsteps approaching outside growing louder, closer. The moonlight spilled through the cracks, outlining his figure. The man who had ruled a city now standing as a father guarding his family. His heart pounded, his finger hovered over the trigger. Then, silence. A whisper of wind, and the faintest echo of footsteps fading into the distance. He waited. Minutes stretched into hours. No attack came, just the sound of rain and the heartbeat of a house that refused to die. When he finally turned around, Sarah stood in the doorway, the twins in her arms. "It's over?" she whispered. He nodded slowly, I lowering the gun. "For tonight." Her tears fell freely as she crossed the room, wrapping her free arm around him. He held her tightly, the twins pressed between them, his lips trembling against her. "Hair, for tonight," he repeated softly, as if saying it could make it true. Outside, the storm began to calm once more, the dawn returning like forgiveness. Steve Smith, once a king of chaos, stood reborn in the quiet arms of love, knowing redemption was not a destination, but a battle he'd fight every single day. As peace returned to the Smith home, the faint echo of an engine purred in the distance. Somewhere, unseen eyes watched through the rain. The past was not dead, only waiting. The question now was, when it comes back, will the devil rise again? Or will the man he became be strong enough to face it? If this story pierced your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Heartwoven Tales. Every tale begins where pain meets love and ends where hope refuses to die.